Okay, so welcome to part two of project 4, part B rendering tutorials. So where we left off, we had just set up a number of views from within our model. Um, and one thing I did forget to mention was just that, once you've kind of set up your views, then you have that's a good time to think about maybe I want to make sure I'm showing enough detail in those particular views. Like maybe I want to add those things like railings, more detailed frames so I can distinguish doors from windows, things like that. But again, you don't need a ton of detail in your 3D for these renderings because we're really just looking at basic things like form and light and shadow. Um, so my next step is going to be to go ahead and start setting up my rendering. The first step will just be to make sure I'm loading my rendering engine. So if this video will cover Enscape. If I'm using Enscape, it won't show up in the normal place, which would be here under render, current render. So it won't show up in this list as a render plugin if you have it installed. It may show up as a toolbar like this. If you're wondering whether you have it, whether it's installed properly and everything like that, you can type in Enscape. I think it's like start command, which actually will start a rendering. But if you just type in Enscape in the command line and you see all these commands pop up, that means you have it. It's installed. I think the best way to work with Enscape is going to be to use that toolbar that I was showing just now. If you don't have it, what you want to do is just right click anywhere on the toolbars up at the top and go to show toolbar and scroll all the way past all the normal Rhino stuff. There's another one called plugin, and you should see there a couple of options. And I think if we just choose the ones, so these are just different languages, what those variations are. If we just, there we go, popped up right there. That's going to have all the buttons we need to I'm going to dock that guy up there. I'm just going to click it, and I'm going to keep that up at the top for using software. Now, the next thing I want to do is set up some materials. One of the things that you'll want to do with making a 3D model for a rendering will be to organize your layers according to materials, because the best way to apply materials like it is, like when you apply line weights and stuff like that, the best way to really apply materials is by layer. You can do it by object if you want to, but that starts to get really messy and hard to keep track of. So in this 3D model, I've kind of organized my layers according to what materials they would be. Again, it's actually not that important for us right now because all we really want to show is everything white, again, because we want to remain kind of indifferent to the material. We're just looking at light and shadow. But we do want to use a material to show glass because obviously it's a kind of important ingredient to how the light will work in our project. So I've put all my windows, which have a glass, a single surface, on a separate layer here, and I just called it glazing. And in order to set up a material for that layer, so everything else I'm just leaving as default. I'm not even touching it. Whatever Rhino does automatically. If you have set a material and you want to just make sure it's on the right thing, again, you just click the little circle to the right of the little colored in square. It's the column called material, and we go to the drop down. We're just going to leave it on that default material or change it back to that default material. So we're going to leave pretty much everything on that material except for our glass. And so to set up glass, I can go in here, and I've already set one up. But what you'll want to do is you'll go plus, click use a new material, and then I kind of like being able to control it myself. I use custom. You can also use the glass though if you. I use custom, and you'll see. Oh, normally it should show up kind of like that. Anyway, so what you want to do is move the gloss finish all the way over to the right, the reflectivity all the way over to the right. We're going to turn the transparency up quite a bit. We turn it up all the way. It shouldn't matter too much what the color that we assign to our glass is. Again, remember these are going to be these renderings are ultimately going to be black and white. So you don't have to worry about assigning a particular color, but you may. It does obviously makes a difference what shade, like how light or dark that color is. And then the other thing that we want to do, which is kind of abnormal, is where it says IOR, that stands for index of refraction. And basically that means, when you look through a piece of transparent or translucent material, obviously the material kind of distorts the light, right? And so index of refraction refers to how much is the light distorted by this material. And we basically just want to assign that to about 1.5. That's usually what glass is. So 1.5. Again, I think if you just make a default material, it would be 1. We're going to set that to 1.5 and go ahead and click OK. Cool. So kind of in terms of setting up materials, the next step that we're going to go through will be to start to play around with setting up our renderings. So Enscape is really pretty easy. Let's go to one of our views. Start with this one. So up at the top here, we have a couple buttons. I click the one on the very left, which is a little cube with the play sign. That's when it'll load Enscape. And it should take a couple seconds to pop up. Okay, and then you can see right away we're getting a pretty interesting view of our model rendered with material and light. Now there's a couple of options that we want to tweak, obviously, for this. I'm just going to turn off my. Okay, and you'll notice that when you make changes in Rhino, what's nice about this is that it'll automatically be reflected in Enscape. Now a couple other things. You'll notice when I move around in my viewport in Rhino, it's also going to reflect in my Enscape window. And the way that we set that up is the third button from the left, where it says synchronize Enscape's camera to changes made in Rhino. And that's how we make sure that, so when I click that, I can either set it to false or true. So we do want it set to true. And that's how we ensure that the view that we've set up in Rhino beforehand is actually what's being shown in our Enscape there. Okay, and ultimately, then we want to go ahead and start setting up our environment. So the way to do that, and I can do that just with my my viewport still open here. First thing to set up is going to be how do I set up my sun? And I just put my Rhino on the other screen so I can see what I'm doing a little better. But what we're going to do is we're going to type in sun, and that's going to open up another little panel for us. And we can keep that over here where our Enscape window is. And again, changes that we make in our sun panel should also be reflected in Enscape. One thing I forgot to mention, just like with the camera, this little kind of cycling like symbol is going to be whether or not things we do in Rhino are going to reflect things like changes to the material, hiding objects, changing the sun. But we also want to make sure that's set to true. Okay, and then over here in the sun, we should see two options at the top. First of all, on. We want to leave it on, and we want to make sure we want to not check manual control. This is how we set our north arrow in case you didn't model it north up. So you can adjust that there. And then if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you're going to want to search for your location, because that'll automatically kind of get the sun angles for us. And I'm going to type in Tucson, select Tucson, great. And then what I'll want to do is scroll up here And I'm just going to play with these two bars, the time or the month of the year, the day of the year, and then the time of day. Obviously, when we're in June, or I'm sorry, like January, February, in winter, basically you'll see less daylight hours. The angle of the sun's going to be a lot lower. You'll also notice that one nice thing that Enscape does is it actually changes the color temperature of our environment, so it does a lot of stuff for us. But obviously, the color of the light in the early morning or the late evening is a little bit different because of the refraction in the atmosphere. So see that it automatically makes those kinds of changes and even starts to pick up color that we see in daylight automatically for it. And okay, so cool. And so we can move around. And one thing I like to do is also just keep my eye on this stuff, which is my azimuth and my altitude. So you can see here, if I'm looking for a particular sunlight angle, let's say I want to show how the light works when it's coming straight in from the east. So early morning, I'm going to June. So I'm looking at that azimuth angle right there. So it's coming, that's my little sun, the circle, coming directly from the east. So if I want to show how like early morning light kind of comes into the project, I could show that. That's about around the equinox. And if I wanted to show what happens in late afternoon in the summer, I could swing around to the west side, show that most of my space, even outdoor space, is in shade. Cool. Okay. So we're going to want to, choose whatever time you think is appropriate, but obviously you're going to want to be thinking about what is that really showing? Like, what is the quality of my space at that time of year and time of day? What do I want? Maybe something like that. Okay, cool. Nice, actually, to get more light. Here's cool. Nice. Right. So once we have a sun angle set up, the next thing that we want to do is establish our kind of settings for how our viewport looks. So over here in Rhino, we're going to go to this little icon that looks like a bunch of sliders with a little eyeball there, the one on the right. It'll say open the Enscape visual settings window. And again, it's going to open up a new dialog. And we're going to go through these one at a time. I'm going to leave everything on my first on my rendering tab alone. I do want my rendering quality turned up, but you're finding that when we go to do captures, that it's not getting you, or it's not working very fast, or it's crashing or something. You can tweak the rendering quality there. Next, I'm going to go over to image. So in here, I have quite a lot of controls that really kind of reflect something like the photography that I'm doing. So if I uncheck auto contrast, you'll see I can tweak the light and dark values. I can tweak then I would have to go back and turn on my exposure. Normal stuff going on. But I can tweak how much color is in my image. I can change color temperature. So color temperature is kind of like what I was talking about before, whether we want a warmer or a colder light. Again, I'm just going to leave that default because Enscape actually does a pretty nice job of doing it for me, right? Doing a warmer color temperature, the early day and late day, and then doing kind of a nice bright white light in the middle of the day. I'm going to leave that alone. And then I don't need to mess with any of this stuff, although I do want to turn off the editing because we can do that kind of thing in Photoshop. Okay. And Yeah, so saturation, again, that won't really matter, right? Because we're not going to show color in our renderings. But anyway, but you can also leave it on auto contrast, which I think does a pretty good job. And then I'm going to go to, yeah, so this will also change kind of like indirect lighting, the amount of indirect lighting we have. Then I'm going to go to atmosphere. And I'm going to uncheck white background because I want to have my sky in the background. That'll actually change my image a little bit. And I can also go down here, and I think default this will be turned down a little bit, sun brightness. So again, that's something where we're seeing kind of really, really bright spots, for example, on the ground there. That's something that we might want to tweak in order to get a better sense of the light quality in a particular place. That sun brightness is going to be a really valuable button that I can adjust. And then the other one that I find really helpful, I think by default, the shadow sharpness will be turned way down, and we'll get these kind of blurry shadow edges. And again, because here in Arizona, a lot of the day or a lot of the year we don't have an overcast sky. We have a pretty bright, clear sky, a bright sun, clear sky. But we get really pretty sharp shadows most of the time. So I'm going to go ahead and move that over to the right. And that's something that's going to pick up on the environmental qualities of the place. And then the other thing we can tweak down here is going to be our sky, our background. Now we can always set that up in Photoshop as well, but you'll notice that it's actually going to change our environment a little bit in terms of just, we have a really cloudy sky, obviously not a lot of sun's getting through, so it's going to make our shadows a little bit blurrier. And I'm going to turn those way down and just turn up the cirrus amount, kind of those wispier clouds that we see all the time. And of course move around in this. That's a little bit more like what we have commonly in Arizona. Okay. Cool. And then I'll just go ahead and click in my viewport. Line my view back up there. All right. And I think that's it for this one. So when I'm ready, I'm going to go over to my next tab, which is the Capture tab. And that's where I'm actually going to do like an export. Get some images I can then take in Photoshop. Now, the first thing I want you to notice is going to be our resolution here. Now, once again, so we can they have like all these default video settings. I think if we just go to Window, that'll copy again like whatever the resolution of our part is. We don't really want to do that. What we want to do is set it to custom, and we actually want to. So first of all, I'm going to check that box where it says Show Safe Frame. And if I look in my Rhino view here, checking and unchecking that, good. But anyway, that should kind of give me this box right here. Maybe if I close it or something. Okay, but that should kind of give me this box right here where it's showing me like how much of that viewport I'm actually capturing based on this aspect ratio that I have set under resolution. So I'm going to make sure I have that checked. And then I'm going to go ahead and type in whatever resolution I want. Now, the thing to remember is always going to be minimum 150 dpi for whatever we're printing. So our image is actually going to be on an 11 by 17, and dpi stands, for dots per inch or pixels per inch. So if we just multiply 17 by 150, that's going to be the resolution we want. And that's going to be 11 times 150. Okay, cool. Right, and so we have this option under image where it says export object ID, material ID, depth channel. And that's actually kind of a useful thing for Photoshop, Object ID and Material ID, because it'll give us a couple of images with like layers that we can use to help select individual objects in Photoshop. And I'll show you what I mean by that when we get to that step. And then down here, we don't need to mess with that. And we don't need to mess with that because we're not doing panorama. And under file format, I am going to choose .png. And I can also change the folder to whatever folder I want. So I'm going to go to this folder, select folder. Okay. And so when we're ready, back in my Rhino, I am going to open up a new toolbar by clicking in the same space. Go toolbar, I'm going to scroll down to my Enscape. And there's one called Enscape Capturing. On that, and that'll open up a new panel here where we have a bunch of different options. We can go ahead and click on that first one, and it'll say create a rendering off the current Enscape view. And so I think I may have, obviously it's cropping the image a little bit differently from what I expected. I think what may have happened is I reversed the width and height on this resolution box here. But really quick, I'll just go to that folder where we set it to kind of a vertical image there. But yeah, so we got a bunch of new like .png files saved in there. And so if I go back to my, go back to this, and I'm just going to swap these numbers, 25, 50, 50. Let me try that one more time. Okay, yeah, that's doing what I want. And you'll notice that when it does do like a high quality screenshot like this, it's going to give us, sharp edges and shadows and stuff like that. Everything kind of, at the scale of whatever are going to be a pretty clean rendering, and hopefully pretty quick as well. So. Okay, and you'll see also that if we go to the other layers that we exported, again, that option can be found under Visual Settings, Capture, Export Object ID, Material ID, and Depth Channel. So those are all going to be what we're going to use later on to figure out how to crop out the background if we show sky or adjust the sky. So there's our, that's how we're going to deal with the background if we don't want just the kind of default Enscape background. Okay, let me just export another, maybe one, two. So again, I have my Enscape window open. Go to that view, it should automatically update. I can change the sun if I want. Yeah, it's a little sunlight coming from the west. Okay, and then one thing I didn't really talk about too much was the ground plane. So again, in Enscape settings, under atmosphere, under horizon. Yeah, so we can set up our kind of ground plane here. You can see that'll change like what's back there. So sometimes it can be useful. I always just so it kind of looks like the ground is extending to the horizon. But I think also if we set it to clear, it'll make it easier to crop it out. Anyway, so we'll set it to clear. Go ahead, capture this view as well. So lost my toolbar. All right, and I'll click the export current view, and it should automatically save that file for me. That same folder, as it pops up. Cool. So yeah, we're getting again with our depth and with channel getting that foreground where we don't have a ground plane kind of cropped so that we can adjust that if we want to. Actually, I think I also have a ground plane modeled in my here, which I might just turn. Oh, but you can't actually see it. Fine. But anyway, so just something to think about is how you want to deal with that ground. We're going to want to shop over that. Right. Cool. So that's going to conclude this tutorial on rendering your model in Enscape. And then in another tutorial, we'll talk about how to make the line drawing, export it, and compose all the layers in Photoshop. Right, I'm going to sign off.